Hi, I'm Max, and in this two-part series I'm gonna tell you about the inner mechanism of homeostasis and how it limits us, how it keeps us in our bad habits, keeps us in our negative thought patterns, and even keeps us in our addictions. One thing we have to understand before we begin is that complex systems have a tendency of not particularly liking change. Whenever a stimulus comes and rocks a system off of its equilibrium, so to speak, or its homeostasis, it counteracts it by doing something to get it back to where it was before that stimulus came in. The mechanism which keeps things in balance is called homeostasis. Now we can spot the system of homeostasis both within larger systems, such as society as a whole, and within ourselves. And in this video I'm going to focus more on our own internal homeostasis. In part 2 I'll be delving more into the homeostasis of society and other larger systems than just ourselves. So in this video I'll be telling you about how we limit ourselves, and in the next video I'll be talking more about how society and other larger groups limit us. Alright, so we can conclude that homeostasis is the mechanism within ourselves that keeps things at a level of equilibrium. Now homeostasis isn't just a bodily mechanism that keeps our temperature and our circadian rhythm in check, but it's also psychological. Much like how your body temperature is kept at a certain level, your thoughts, your behaviors, and even your emotions follow the mechanism of homeostasis. For example, if you're faced with information that collides with your worldview, your mind will make up all sorts of rationalizations as to why that information is wrong, and thus we're kept at equilibrium because we don't need to change our worldview. Now the homeostasis regarding our worldview is also often referred to as paradigm lock. We're locked in our worldview with no chance of getting out of it. Now the mechanism of homeostasis also works with emotions. For example, if you've had an extremely good week, you likely sabotage yourself to get you back to your ground level. How you sabotage yourself can be, for instance, getting into an argument with your spouse, or overthinking, or producing negative mental imagery, or just stressing about something in particular. The point is that behavior gets you out of that heightened sense of happiness back to your ground level, your homeostasis. So now, one of the most commonly seen fields in which homeostasis takes place is when it comes to our health. Now I'm gonna tell you, there's a reason that diets and workout plans are hard to get to stick, and that reason is precisely homeostasis. When we try to change our health, change our equilibrium, we oftentimes make behaviors unconsciously that get us back to that same level. For example, we might all of a sudden get unmotivated and decide to skip the gym. Or we might decide to have a cheat day even though we didn't plan for it. Now this is the mechanism of homeostasis. This is why it's so important to understand the mechanism of homeostasis, because we'll get frustrated if we don't know why we can't stick to a diet or a workout plan or something similar. Now we're complex systems. Even if we want one thing, such as losing weight, we end up sabotaging ourselves and get a different result than we intended to. Now what we have to understand about systems as a whole is that if we want to change a system, you can't just change one thing, but you have to change the whole system. Now if we use this reasoning for our health, if we want a diet to be successful, we have to not just change our eating patterns, but also our mindsets. The same is true for our worldview. If we want to take a belief that collides with our worldview and integrate it, we need to change the whole system of our worldview. Now know that the way homeostasis gets us to equilibrium isn't necessarily a psychological effect. It may even be on the physical level. We may even get sick. We may even start feeling tired. Now the mechanism of homeostasis has two parts. The first part is that it recognizes change. It recognizes when it's off that equilibrium. And this we have a certain degree of control over, because it's affected by how we perceive things. Now for example, if you perceive yourself to be unproductive or lazy or whatever, then when you do have that good week, that good productive week, then your mind is going to interpret that as you being off of equilibrium, and you're going to self-sabotage. Now you can see how dangerous this thinking is, because the instant you become productive, you're going to self-sabotage and get yourself back to your usual level. Now this is extremely dangerous if you perceive yourself to be unhappy on average. Because whenever you get that glimpse of happiness, your mind will interpret that as you being off homeostasis, and you'll self-sabotage. Now this can also be seen as a vicious cycle. We believe that we're unhappy on average, then whenever we get that small glimpse of happiness, our homeostasis will get us back, and then that'll just reinforce our belief that we're unhappy. Now, you can also use this mechanism for good. You can trick the mechanism. If you increase your perception of how happy and productive you are, it's going to be harder to get you off of equilibrium, and hence you're going to stay at that level. So now the second part of the mechanism of homeostasis is that it does something to get you back to the level of equilibrium. When you've reached that point, when you're actively self-sabotaging yourself, you have to become aware of the mechanism of homeostasis. Ask yourself, what has gotten me off of my level of equilibrium? See, now we do this because recognizing the source often makes the self-sabotaging behavior simply disappear. It melts away. Now the key practical takeaways from this video is that you should start to try to notice when your homeostasis is doing its thing. For this, you can, for instance, develop your awareness so you can more easily spot when the mechanism is working within yourself. Now we also have to know that working about changing our perceptions about ourselves, it takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight. Now I can promise you this, when you're on this journey about working on yourself and working about the perceptions about yourself, you're going to start to be less and less affected by the mechanism of homeostasis. And that is all I had to say for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Out.